Welcome to week 4 of Art with Mr. Orlando. This week we're going to explore the element of art texture and the principles of design, movement, and emphasis. Please come join me at the teaching table and let's get to work.
Texture refers to the nature of how something feels. It can be actual or it can be implied. This painting, if you're able to really look at it, you're able to see that there's a bunch of grit kind of in here. It's almost like sand kind of integrated with the paint. So this is an example of texture actually being used in the actual paint. And it's a kind of a minimal piece, but it has, it actually has something that would have a certain feel. It's not just an implied observation. The next one also has texture in the sense that it's not a smooth surface, but it also has a bit of implied, or what you see, what you're probably seeing, it looks like maybe there was, what was it called, burlap put down and then spray painted through the burlap. And that's created this sense of texture. Also even a little bit of kind of rhythm and referencing pattern. But what you're seeing here is something that I would think of as having a lot of texture, because it looks like it would feel very, very rough. And visually, it's actually very rough because it's so broken up. Then the next two pieces I'm going to show you, this piece is using a lot of texture. It looks like it's kind of scratched, right? And that scratching actually gives it that sense of a lot of texture. But if I was to turn it sideways and look at it, you'll see that it's completely smooth. And I typically wouldn't like touch work like this, but since it's mine, it's easier to feel comfortable touching it. But it's completely and utterly smooth. So this one references texture, but it's not at all rough, although it does look pretty rough. Here's also another example of one that's also completely smooth. So those are a couple of examples of ways that I've used texture in paintings. So texture refers to how something might feel. This rabbit looks like it would feel furry. So that would be the texture of the rabbit. It is actual, as in this rabbit, or it's implied, like in the drawing of the sample that I put here. Next, we're going to explore movement on our principle of design. Movement can be real or it can be implied. So movement embodies action, whether it's real action, like the bunny driving the car, and the real action of movement, or some type of implied movement. This is a piece by an artist named Marcel Duchamp. And you can see that it is a painting of an image of a figure. And it's a figure coming down the stairs. And it is supposed to be the embodiment, or kind of the implied movement of a figure coming down the stairs. So we have both real and implied. And the next type is something that we call a directive, or where you're looking at the placement of elements to direct the viewer's eyes. The next principle of design is emphasis. And emphasis, actually, it's the creation of a focal point, so that so that the audience knows exactly what it is that's being focused on in a work of art.
Emphasis is the creation of a focal point.
Today we're going to look at the work of an artist named Claire Rojas. The first thing that we're going to look at is movement, to see what movement is actually in her work. The first piece I want to draw attention to is the figure of a woman. And I would like you to actually look at the placement she put the figure. The figure is over on the left-hand side, but if you look at the clothes, look at the print. There's all this movement that directs you this way. And the fact that the figure is isolated over to the left draws attention and emphasis both to the figure, but also to the action, the movement of moving towards something. Even the direction of these lines, it creates this large sense of movement in this isolated field. The next piece I'd like us to look at is this one, which is a good example of kind of placement and emphasis. The placement of the figure is kind of in the center. You know that the focal point is really this figure, because that's really all you have. But if you look in, you'll see the replication of a number of elements. One of the elements that you see replicated are the eyes. But these eyes are different than these eyes. These eyes are crying and they are looking back. These eyes, it's unclear of exactly where they're looking, but you notice that these eyes, which are on a whale, it looks like a baby whale and what could be a mama whale, it could be a dad whale, but oftentimes when we show a small figure and a large figure together, it's interesting, but culturally we have this notion of them as being a mom and a baby, or a mom and child. In this sense, you have the eyes of the figure looking back, and the shield, which could literally represent a shield. But the emphasis really takes you to, I think, the figure's eyes, but also kind of directs you backwards, as if this story in this painting is actually something from the past versus something moving forward, as we saw in the first example. The last piece I wanted to show you by Claire Rojas is this piece, and I want to show you this piece, and I want us to look through it with these three components. The first we're going to look at is texture. In this piece, can you identify where the texture is in this painting? For me, this is a very textured field. It looks rough. It doesn't look smooth, and it has, if I was to look at it, I would think that it has a lot of texture. Let's look at the emphasis on this piece and look at how movement actually plays a role in this. Now, movement, we talked about the convergence, right? The convergence of these elements. But if we look at just the lines that kind of go forward, they bring us up here. And the horizontal lines, those will take us back and forth until we land on something. And interestingly enough, if we went back and forth on the horizontal lines, we would land on this one, we'd land on that one, and then we'd land on this one. So it would bring us to this point, just the replication of the elements of these tree-like figures, right? And we would land on this story. Also, if we look at the convergence of these lines, it also takes us here. So the area of emphasis is really here. Also, we have that peculiar component. Like these two creatures, there aren't a bunch of creatures, little figures out. There are these two, and they're looks like they're behind a tree. So they're either looking at something and it's behind this tree, or they're looking at each other. But this area right here is the area of emphasis, and it's the focal point of this piece. And we see how all these lines come towards this focal area.
Well, that's it for this week. We've explored the element of art texture and the principles of design movement and emphasis. Make sure that you fill out your principles of design and your elements of art. Then we have one more week and then we'll have completed the entire assignment. I hope you guys have a good week. Stay safe and I'll see you next week.